Hello and welcome to episode 14 of The Terror Cellar. I'm Andy Crofts and it is lovely to be back with two more stories. I just wanted to say thank you to all of my new followers. I've been having an influx of new followers lately, and it is probably down to my friend Emma over at Real Life Ghost Stories, who has been amazing by letting me guest on her show the other day. I don't know if you have seen it, but I chatted with Emma for about an hour, and we talked about all things, you know, like my personal ghost story, cryptids, my favourite film, horror film, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it was a really nice chat, and she's so cool. Do you know what I mean? And it was an honour because I've always been a fan of her show. So if you haven't heard it, please go over to Real Life Ghost Stories and you'll see it was a bonus episode when featuring myself, Andy Crofts. And yeah, it's a good listen. But yeah, anyway, because of that, I've had obviously a bunch of people pay attention to my show, which is I'm really grateful for. So if you are new, thank you very much. Okay, it means the world that you're coming along for the ride with me, and we'll all grow together, right? But today I have a couple of stories for you, both in a similar vein. Okay, they're not too different in a weird way, but I thought I'd put them together for that reason. But yeah, it's two cool stories, and I'm not going to mess around too long, and just get on with it. Okay, so get yourself prepared. Put your headphones on. Sit back, close your eyes, dim the lights, and get ready for story number 1, The House of Hell. For most of my life, I considered myself a skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. In fact, I was one of those people who would scoff at stories of hauntings or paranormal experiences, chalking them up to be overactive imaginations. I wasn't necessarily closed-minded. I just needed hard evidence to believe in something. I'd often say, "Show me and then I'll believe." That's why I rarely engaged in conversations about the paranormal. I simply thought it was a waste of time. It was about 5 years ago when I decided to leave the city behind. I had grown wary of its constant noise and bustling crowds and the endless cycle of failed relationships. I wanted peace, and I found it in the form of an old secluded cottage in the Scottish Highlands. The cottage was everything you'd imagine from a postcard. A charming, weathered building with ivy climbing up the stone walls, a thatched roof and surrounded by rolling fields. But it wasn't just picturesque, it was remote. No neighbours for miles, just the highlands stretching endlessly in every direction. This cottage wasn't just a home, it was also heart of a small sanctuary I'd built for rescued animals. It wasn't a money-making venture, just something I did out of love. I had horses, goats, cows, ducks and chickens, all of them living peaceful lives in the vast open space around the property. After years of city stress, the quiet companionship of these animals brought me joy. Inside the house, my evenings were simple but satisfying. I'd light a log fire, pour myself a glass of wine and read a good book while my 4 cats curled up around me. I had a television, but it rarely came on. It reminded me too much of the life I'd left behind. The creaks and the groans of the old house didn't bother me at first. I figured it was just settling, as old houses do, but in time those noises began to take on a different character, one that I couldn't ignore. It started subtly, almost innocuously. I'd be sitting in the living room, engrossed in a novel, when I'd hear the distinct sound of a door upstairs creaking open, followed by a faint click as it closed again. Other times I'd hear the clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen, as though someone was rummaging through the drawers. At first, I dismissed these sounds as quirks of an old house, or perhaps my imagination. But as the days turned into weeks, the activity grew more frequent and harder to ignore. One evening, as I was outside feeding the animals, something happened that truly unsettled me. It was late, and the setting sun bathed the fields in a warm golden light. As always, I had made sure to close the cottage door before heading out. Yet, as I turned back towards the house, I saw the door wide open, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. I frowned, convinced I'd closed it. I walked back, shut the door firmly, and returned to the animals. But no sooner had I resumed my task than I heard the door slam open again, louder this time. My stomach tightened as I turned to see it wide open once more. It felt as though I was being taunted. That night, as I sat in the living room trying to relax, my cats suddenly sprang up to attention. All four of them stared at the same corner of the room, their eyes wide with fear. Their bodies were tense and their tails puffed up. I followed their gaze and saw nothing, yet the cats were transfixed, their heads slowly turning as if they were tracking something unseen moving across the room. Then, as suddenly as it began, they relaxed and returned to their spots around the fire. The unease in the house grew stronger with each passing day. By this point, I could no longer dismiss the occurrences as mere coincidences. The sounds, the open door, and the cat's strange behaviour, something was wrong. One afternoon, as I was feeding the animals, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I turned to look at the cottage. My heart stopped. Through one of the upstairs windows, I saw a dark figure move past. It wasn't a trick of the light. I was certain of what I saw. I dropped what I was doing and hurried back to the house, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was in my house? Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive, as though the air had thickened. I heard faint murmurs like distant voices coming from the living room. When I entered, I saw the television on, flickering with static. I hadn't turned it on, and it hadn't been on when I left. A chill ran through me as I stood there, staring at the screen. Desperate for reassurance, I called a friend who was deeply interested in the paranormal. When I described what had been happening, she was almost giddy with excitement. "It sounds like you've got a full-blown haunting," she said. She suggested I take a break from the house to clear my head, just in case the isolation was getting to me. I decided to take her advice. I grabbed some things, left the TV on this time, and drove aimlessly through the Highlands, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. Yet even as I drove, I felt an inexplicable pull back to the cottage, as though something didn't want me to leave. When I returned that evening, the house was eerily silent. The TV had turned itself off, and the cats were scattered around the room, unusually subdued. As I walked through the house, I noticed one of my cats wasn't with the others. I found her in the small utility room near the washing machine. She was lying on the floor, perfectly still. I bent down to check on her, and my heart broke. She was dead. She wasn't breathing. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly, as though something had startled her in her final moments. Tears streamed down my face as I cradled her lifeless body. That night, exhausted and emotionally drained, I went to bed early. I'd barely drifted off when I was awoken, feeling an oppressive presence in the room. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, with the vague outline of a hooded robe, like a monk. The air around it felt heavy, suffocating, and filled with the overwhelming sense of malice. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in terror as the figure stood there, motionless. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it faded away into the darkness. I lay awake for the rest of the night, my heart pounding in my chest. By morning, I was a wreck. I called my friend again, desperate for advice. She sounded concerned and urged me to leave the house immediately. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon my home. This was my sanctuary, my escape from the chaos of the world. Instead, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. Over the next few weeks, I adopted a defiant attitude. Whenever I heard strange noises or felt a cold presence, I ignored it or firmly told it to leave me alone. I don't know if the spirit, or whatever it was taken aback by my resolve, but the activity began to wane. The oppressive feeling lingered, but the incidents became less frequent. To this day, the cottage isn't entirely free of its ghostly inhabitant. Occasionally, I still hear faint footsteps or feel a cold draft that defies explanation. But I've learned to live with it. This house is mine and I refuse to be driven out. The experience has changed me in profound ways. I'm no longer a skeptic. I do believe in ghosts now. Not because of hearsay, but because I live with one. And while I don't claim to understand the paranormal, I've developed a deep respect for the unknown. So here I am, still in the cottage, sharing my life with my animals, my books, my cats, and the ghost that calls this place home. Thank you, Mary, for sending in that story. That is one hell of a creepy story, and the fact that, we are assuming that the spirit had something to do with the death of your cat is very strange and very horrific, really. I mean, what did it do? I mean, what did the cat see that would cause it to just drop down dead like that? I mean, obviously, there is a possibility. It's not completely out of the question to say the cat couldn't have just died randomly, but putting all of it together with, what you're saying about the house and seeing the figure at the end of the bed, hearing all the noises and the cat's following something through the living room, it's pretty safe to say that this entity has something to do with the death of the cat. And that just freaks me out. Do you know what I mean? Why is this figure, why did it want you out of the house? Or what wasn't it happy about? I mean, if it's some kind of monk, then it would have been from way back, have to do some Googling about the Highlands, monks and stuff. But yeah, anyway, that was a great story, and I hope for your sake that you are living comfortably and, you are on top of the whole situation. And now for story number 2. Grandma's room. This is a story that hasn't happened to me personally, but happened to one of my closest friends. When I was in primary school, I had a friend named Emma. She believed in ghosts, but if I'm being honest, I thought she was completely crazy for it. Ghosts, spirits and the supernatural, those weren't things I could wrap my head around. But Emma was different. Anytime these topics came up, she'd lean in, lower her voice and tell us a story. It wasn't just any story, it was the story, the same one every single time. She never changed a word, never exaggerated or forgot a detail. And that's what made it so chilling. The consistency of it, the way she'd get this look in her eye, as if she was revealing it all over again. It slowly started to creep under my skin. The more she told it, the more I started to believe her, and here's the story she told. When I lived in England, I used to stay over at my grandparents' house sometimes. I was really close to them, especially my granny. She was sweet, kind and always humming little tunes while she baked or knitted. But when I was about 5 or 6, she passed away. She died in that house, in the downstairs bedroom at the very end of the hallway. Even after she passed, that room stayed mostly the same. The door to the bedroom was always slightly open, just enough to notice, like someone had left it ajar on purpose. It was odd, but no one really thought much about it. A few months after my granny died, I went to stay the night at the house with just my granddad. I remember it was a normal day, quiet and uneventful. There were a few small noises here and there, things that could have been the creaks of the old house. Maybe the wind. Nothing out of the ordinary, or at least, that's what I told myself. But when night fell, the house changed. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't a bad feeling exactly, but it wasn't good either. It was just different. Heavy, maybe. Almost like the house itself was holding its breath. Around 9 p.m, my granddad and I went upstairs to bed. He went to his room and I went to mine. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I felt watched. It wasn't the kind of feeling you can ignore. It was like there was something else in the room with me, standing in the corner, or maybe just outside my line of sight. The air felt charged, like you could reach out and touch it. It got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of that room. So I decided to go downstairs and get a drink. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the oppressive feeling lifted. I could breathe again. It was like whatever had been in that room stayed behind. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Across the hall, at the very end, the door to my granny's bedroom was wide open. Not just slightly ajar like it usually was, but fully open. That didn't make sense. My granddad was still upstairs, and I know I closed it earlier. And then I saw her. She stepped into the doorway, right into the frame. It was my granny, or at least, it looked like her. But it wasn't right. She wasn't fully there. Her body was completely black, almost like a shadow, but I could make out her shape. She was wearing a nightgown just like I remembered. For a moment, I thought she was looking at me, and I couldn't move. Couldn't even scream. I just stood there staring. Then, before I could process what was happening, her figure started to melt. Slowly, her shadowy form began dripping down into a puddle of darkness on the floor. The whole thing felt like it lasted forever, but it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. And then she was gone. The puddle of the shadow disappeared into the floor, and everything went silent. The air was heavy again, like someone or something had truly, finally died. I stood there in shock, my legs refusing to move. Eventually, I managed to go back upstairs to my room, but I didn't sleep a wink that night. The house didn't feel the same anymore. I never stayed over again after that. I didn't want to risk seeing her, or whatever it was, ever again. Emma always ended her story the same way. She'd look at us, her face pale, her voice steady, and say, "I'm in college now, and I still think about that night. Every time I walk down a hallway with a bedroom door at the end, I can't help but feel nervous. I'm always scared I'll look up and see something or someone standing there." Hearing her tell it back then gave me chills, and to this day, I still think about it. I've never looked at open bedroom doors the same way. What was it that Emma saw? Was it really her granny, trying to say goodbye, or was it something darker? Something that took on her form? Whatever it was, one thing's for sure. It left a mark on Emma, and now me too. That story was sent in by Alok, and thank you for sending that in. It's one of them situations, isn't it, where, you've seen an apparition, you've seen something that resembles a family member, and you're bordering on the classic doppelganger mimic thing. Was it the spirit of your grandmother, Emma's grandmother, coming to see her? Or was it something much darker, like you said, and you just don't know. And then with all of these crazy mimic stories and things, it's certainly making me question everything now. What is the darker purpose here of the spirit? I mean, what is it? What is the intention? It's very, very freaky. But that was a great little story. So, yeah, thank you very much for sending that one in. So we are now at the end of today's show, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for listening in, and to all of my new followers who are now on the Terror Cellar train. I really appreciate it. So thank you. And remember, please leave me a review. Leave your reviews, and a rating of the show. All these little things really help out, So yeah, leave a nice 5-star rating. That would be very sweet. Thank you. And a review and a follow and all of that kind of stuff, whatever you do. And yeah, it'll just help the podcast grow a little better. If the algorithm, if that's what you call it, spots that you're getting some feedback, I think it likes it. So yeah, so anyway, yeah, do that. And I will see you for the next episode for lots more creepy stories. But anyway, I'm Andy Crofts. It's been a pleasure reading them out to you, and I'll see you for the next episode. Don't have nightmares.